I grew up in Southern California and spent a bit of time in the ocean. When I was 15, I bought my first surfboard, having been fascinated with surfing from the time I was a kid. My friends and I would head to the beach in the summertime and stay all day, switching off between surfing and beach volleyball. It sounds awesome, I know, and it was. However, I remember the first few times paddling out that there was something I needed to pay close attention to. Normally, you would head down to the beach with your stuff, put your towel and backpack down in a certain spot, and then paddle out from there. Then you would catch waves, paddle back out, and wait for more waves to come. The thing that I needed to pay attention to, though, was the drift. The ocean current would unknowingly and slowly carry you away from your original starting point without you knowing it. Since you were staring at the horizon, looking for the next set of waves, you didn't even realize that you were drifting down the beach. If you were out for 15 or 20 minutes, you could easily drift 1,000 yards away, then turn around and realize that your stuff was far away in the distance, all because your attention was completely wrapped up in something else. Maybe you felt the drift. You stopped paying attention for what seemed to be a moment. It's your grades, or another sport you're trying to play, or a friendship you've been trying to make work. And all of a sudden, you realize that you were further from the mark than you thought. And you thought about quitting or just giving up. We probably all experience this differently in specific areas of our lives, but I bet there's one area where most of us have had this feeling before. Right here in church. An area where we probably feel like we're sometimes drifting more than anything else is when it comes to our relationship or lack of relationship with God. We come to church and we want to get closer to God, so we start to read our Bibles more, or praying more, or going to church more, but then things get busy and we just don't. Or we make the mistake that leaves us feeling like we're further from God than before, so we try and fail again. Or maybe you're already pretty uncertain about this God thing to begin with, but you decided to pray about something as a last-ditch effort, and nothing changed. Things got worse instead of better. Now, when you're surfing, sometimes you drift to the point where you have to do some of the hard work of paddling all the way back to your spot. Sometimes it's so far, you'd rather just quit and get out of the water and start walking. But when it comes to our relationship with God, among other things, it feels like we're swimming against the tide. And sometimes we wonder, is it all even worth it? Of course, we don't say that out loud. We just slowly start to drift. We stop praying. We stop showing up. We get busy with other things and keep our distance from God, from the church, and even from the people we know who are close to Him. And I just wonder, if I were to put up a near and far chart and ask you, where do you think you are? What would you say? It's not like we want to be far, necessarily. But what else are we supposed to do when we're tired and we feel like this whole God and church thing isn't working out? Are there even any other options? And what are we supposed to do if we've already checked out and walked away? Now, no matter where you are in your spiritual life, the scripture that we're going to look at today has something to say to you. Because we're not just talking about some guys who thought about giving up or moving on. We're talking about two guys who were already on the road out of town. Now, just to give you some background, the people involved with Jesus had expectations of what following Him and being in His crowd would look like. They anticipated that Jesus would be the next king of Israel. In fact, many people left their jobs and homes to follow Him. So you can imagine their surprise when Jesus was put to death on the cross. This left all of His followers wondering, now what? Now, last week we said that Mary just sat outside of the tomb waiting. Like many of Jesus' followers, she didn't know what to do. That's where this passage begins, on the very same day. Now, that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. Okay, so two of Jesus' followers are walking down the road, talking about everything that had happened. What they're talking about is interesting, but what really matters is the direction that they're headed. Luke says they're headed to Emmaus from Jerusalem. These two were literally walking away from it all. Their supposed king had just died, and you can't follow a king who's dead. Now what? Maybe they were ready to call it quits, or maybe they just wanted a break. We don't know their exact intention, but the point is they had to make a decision to leave. Some of you are on that kind of road right now. you had an encounter with Jesus. Maybe it was at a summer camp or a retreat or in your small group. It all felt real at the time. But then things changed. Doesn't feel the same. The changes you saw in yourself started to fade. So you started walking back to where you used to be before Jesus was ever a part of the picture. And if that's you, then you need to see what happens next. Because there's something you need to know about Jesus that might be a game changer for you. What happened next was totally unexpected. It says this, as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. So suddenly, Jesus himself, the risen Son of God, comes up and walks along with them. I have no idea why they didn't recognize him. Maybe he looked different, or because they weren't expecting him, it didn't register. I don't know, but they didn't. And he didn't immediately stop them and say, hey, idiots, it's me. Let's go back. No, he just comes alongside them and walks. And not only that, but Jesus begins to talk with them and ask questions. At one point, Jesus even tells them about how the prophets from years earlier had told them that this would happen, and began to teach them how it was all a part of God's plan. And finally, it got late, and they'd all walked together a really long way. So the three of them stopped for the night and had supper. Around the table, Jesus picked up some bread and began to pass it out. And right at that moment, the text says this, then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? They finally recognized that this guy who had traveled all that way with them is Jesus. And then he vanishes. And you can imagine what they're thinking. Dude, that was Jesus. But what was he doing here with us? Shouldn't he be appearing to people who are going toward Jerusalem and not walking away from Jerusalem? But he walked with us, and our hearts were burning because of him. And that's what they learned that day. And it's what many of us desperately need to hear. They thought that they were far because they were walking away. And they would have been right had it been up to just them. But it wasn't. They might have been walking away from Jesus, but Jesus was walking after them. And they ran into a truth that's going to be pretty freeing to a lot of us, and it's this. He's near even when you're far. You might be walking or drifting away from Jesus, but Jesus isn't walking or drifting away from you. No, he's walking with you. He's coming after you. It's as if he's watching from the beach and moving along with you as you drift, without even you knowing. And that's a really huge deal, because it means if you want to come back, all you have to do is turn around. You don't need to promise anything or earn anything or climb some spiritual mountain back to where you were. No, you just have to turn around. And that's what these guys did. They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. And that's my question for you. Where are you? Is there an area of your life where you begin to walk the other direction? Where you begin to drift? Maybe it isn't in obvious ways, but in small, subtle ways. Have you begun to move in reverse, to back away from him, to check out? If so, I want you to know that you're not alone. Nearly every follower of Jesus will encounter a moment when they find themselves on the road walking away. The thing you have to decide is how you're going to answer the question, now what? So here's some things to remember in those moments. First, notice him. Sometimes when we're busy walking away from God, we don't even notice that he's still with us. Just like the two guys on the road, we can go for miles in the wrong direction, feeling disappointed by God, and fail to notice that Jesus was with us the whole time. So today, I want to challenge you to take notice. Pay attention to the burning in your heart. Where do you sense God at work in your life, in the world around you? Even on days when it feels like he's a million miles away. Even on days when you wonder if he really exists. Even on days when you think he's mad at you. Maybe if you just look up, you'll find that he was with you all along. The second one is this. turn around. When the men realized Jesus was with them, it changed everything, especially the direction that they were heading in. It says they immediately turned around and began walking back. And you can do the same thing. Just turn around if you've wandered off into bad relationships. You can always turn around and go back. Or acting in ways that you shouldn't. You can always turn around and go back. Or ignoring your relationship with God. You can always turn around and go back. The truth is that when you and I are walking away and find ourselves going backward in our faith, drifting in our faith, Jesus is not as far off as you think he is. And the secret in this is not to muster up the courage and willpower to make it all the way back to Jerusalem on your own. The gospel tells us that Jesus actually comes and walks alongside of us in our pain, in our rebellion, and reveals himself to us and gives us the invitation to simply turn around. And if you're not a Christian, or if you're considering giving this whole thing up because it just isn't for you, know this: wherever your doubt or unbelief takes you, it will never take you away from Jesus. He wants to be with you no matter what. And when you get to the moment when you think you're ready to find your way back to him, you don't have to worry. He's right there. Just turn around. Turn to him, because he's near even when you're